collect on each person, risk factors, outcomes. Write down the quality you want to record it on. Do you want to record blood pressure in terms of millimeters of mercury, or do you just want to record whether they're hypertensive or non-hypertensive? And then take that prospective design and apply it to the data you'll get from this historical data set. Does the data set satisfy the criteria you set up in your prospective study? If so, you're sitting on a gold mine. You're very, very lucky. You have data whose quality is maybe as good as what you'd have in the prospective study. But usually you're not so lucky. Usually you have to live with the data that was collected, not as complete enough. In other words, you don't have all the sufficient quantity, and what's there might not be of sufficient quality. But it does give you a starting point. So this last bullet, or this last note I put here, is important. It's a good starting point. In other words, if you're beginning a career, asking yourself, do people of a particular acculturation group, are they at higher risk of developing diabetes? Before I do that large prospective study, I might want to do a cross-sectional study, or I might want to do a study using historical data just to see if Native Hawaiians have different incidents of developing disease than non-Hawaiians, Caucasians, Filipinos. Because if not, maybe acculturation isn't going to work as a risk factor. So it's always good to start thinking about something you can do pretty quickly and pretty inexpensively as a good starting point to get initial data to plan for a study. And therefore, I would not recommend people who are starting on a research career to have a prospective cohort study as their initial starting point. If I go back, if I could, to the very beginning of today's slides, and as you see, there's a lot I haven't covered, and that's why I mean that today's lecture will carry over until next week, that we talked about different types of observational studies. And by far, the cross-sectional study, the retrospective cohort study, and the case control study are much less expensive in terms of time and money and effort than the prospective study. These are good starting points to begin with. And even more so, the experimental study is probably the most expensive in terms of money and time to do. This will probably be the last thing you'd want to do in terms of starting a research career or starting a series of studies to address a particular research question. So with that in mind, and realizing there's a lot we haven't covered, let me just skip ahead to the very end of my slides for today. And all this stuff, and I apologize to Marjorie in particular that she didn't get a chance to speak today. All this stuff we'll talk about next week. But this is the homework I'd like you to think about for next week. This was a little exercise that Erin put together that will be part of a future homework assignment, where basically she presents a problem. She talks about Native Hawaiians and Pacific people who are living on the various islands which make up the state of Hawaii, may not have access to care that's as easily and efficiently obtained as people living on the island of Oahu. So ultimately, she wants to talk about designing a study, see if the use of telemedicine, telephone calls, computer connections, and things like that is a way to improve the quality of care that, for example, diabetics, Native Hawaiian diabetics or Pacific people diabetics living on these other islands might have. So ultimately, we want you to think about that and design a study to talk about telemedicine. But for next week, I want you to think about maybe doing a first easy, quick study to address this question, to see if there's any evidence that telemedicine might be useful. And the best evidence you can give me is that people living on these different islands besides Oahu are having worse outcomes than people living on Oahu. So the assignment is to look and do a quick study, cross-sectional study, a retrospective cohort study. Maybe you can do a quick prospective study. Maybe you can do a case control study, something we'll talk about next week, to see if the quality of care is different from people living on different islands. Now, I went on the web and I looked at what are good quality of care metrics for people with diabetics, and they said you should have your hemoglobin A1C tested every year. You should have your LDL cholesterol tested every year. You should have a screening, neuropathy screening every year. You should have an eye exam every year. You'd also could monitor the number of visits that these people had to emergency departments. That's a measure of poor quality of care. That care got so bad that a person had to visit an emergency department, or maybe hospitalizations. So what I want you to do for next week is to think about a quick way to, as a preliminary study, answer the question, or to at least address the question: do diabetics living on these different islands have different qualities of care? So this is, let's suppose you have access to the HMSA data set. That seems to be the data set that's handling the claims data for the state of Hawaii. You can, from that data set, you can identify who subscribers were, where they're living. You have their place of residence. You also have in that information about doctor visits, tests that were performed, emergency room visits, hospitalizations. You have a very small budget. I won't tell you how much it is, but it's something in your mind that's not enough to answer the question in a way you'd like to do the study. This is a quick early start to this research journey. And I want you to think about how you would design a study, a quick study to answer the question whether the quality of care for diabetics is different on islands other than comparing diabetics on the island of Oahu to diabetics on the other 5 islands that make up the state of Hawaii. So that's your homework assignment. If you could send in a brief 1 or 2 paragraph description, those are things we can discuss next week. Any questions before we go on the homework assignment? I see you have a few comments at the end. The Honolulu Hot program. Oh yes, I forgot. It's the oldest cohort study. Is that true, Marjorie? I didn't realize. That predates Framingham. If so, I apologize. I see no other questions popping up. Does everyone understand what the assignment is for next week? I'll take absence of an answer to be the affirmative. Hopefully I haven't lost everybody. Okay, great. So please send in a description of how you might want to do this. I realize that some of you have much more training in this field than others, so there's no bad answer. There's no necessarily good answer. We're not going to be embarrassing anyone. So just send us your thoughts, and we'll talk about that. And we'll talk a little bit about case control studies, but mostly about experimental studies next week. Okay, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to all you guys. I hope you have a great day. And I'm going to go start. I'll hang on and talk to Aaron for a couple of minutes, and I'll connect with the rest of you guys for next week. Remember, you have my email. Send me any questions you have. I'll be glad to try to answer them as quickly as I can. And again, I wish you all a great day. So I'll just hang on here with Aaron for a few minutes while all you guys disconnect. See you, Rachel.